here. I love Ghost Story. Except I'm the super big chicken. Mrs. Crow can attest to that fact. I watch any scary movie mostly like this. Because I scare easily. Come up behind me and I'm not expecting it, I will scream like a 6-year-old. Now, I worked for many years at a living history village here in Cedar Rapids. The village itself was never a real town, of course. But all of the buildings that were there, of course, are real buildings that came from places around Lynn County. People regularly, when we were out there, would ask us, are any of these buildings haunted? And our reply was always, no, of course not, don't be ridiculous. Because nobody really wants to know the truth. And the truth is, that village is way out on the far edge of town. Deep in a valley, bordered on one side by the river, and on the other side by thick forest. There's one road in and out, a long winding road that goes up over high bluffs, bluffs that for 1,000 years have been lined with the graves of a race long dead and vanished. And that road goes down into that dark valley, a long ways from anyone or anything else. One of my coworkers regularly said, yeah, 36 buildings, and no one to hear you scream. Now, for heaven's sakes, don't go out from here tonight and tell my former coworkers that I've been telling you this stuff. Don't make trouble for them. You keep it between us, all right? Now, I started working there when I was about 16 years old as a volunteer. In summers, I worked as a maintenance guy. And our storage building was an old farmhouse. And it had been, in the 1920s, the original farmhouse for the site when it was a working farm. But it had been storage for decades, probably. And all the windows were boarded over. One bare bulb illuminated each room. Generations of succeeding summer workers had covered the walls with interesting graffiti. The strangest of the rooms was the passage to the basement, or rather what was left of it. The stairs were long gone. There was left only the black open maw that dropped straight down into the dark dirt basement. Now on the wall opposite of that, we stored rakes and shovels and hoes and all the garden tools. And one afternoon, it was a hot afternoon, and it was always cold inside the building. Amy Hospodarski now. Amy Weld and I were standing in front of that opening to the basement stairs talking, when all of a sudden, and without warning, one of the sharp metal-tined rake heads flew off the wall, whizzed just past our heads, and dived into the open basement. Neither of us were excited about going in the building on our own. Now, the Village Hotel. The Village Hotel was not a hotel in its original life. It had been a farmhouse, a quiet family home for 120 years or so. But you know, over 120 years, you're bound to find some secrets. Some things that you don't want to leave the walls. But the problem with keeping things within the walls is that invariably they have to come back out. Now, we would regularly get psychics and paranormalists who would come through and say, oh yes, I can feel the spirits there. We'd say, yes, whatever, go on. But one person had come out of the hotel one day and said, oh yes, there's a little boy. And his name is William. All right, whatever. We didn't think about it. We certainly didn't talk with anybody else about it. Now, we did, for years and years, a day camp called Time Travel Day Camp. Are any of you young enough that you might have at one time put on a bonnet and an apron or a... The children dressed up, and they took on characters, and they interpreted. Oh, you're nodding your head, you know. We were getting the hotel family settled in one day, and they were choosing their characters, and one of the little boys looked up at me and said, "I'd like to be William." We hadn't told them about William. Now, frequently the village was full of people when we were doing large events, reenactors who had to stay the night, and every bed in the village was full, including the 6 or 7 in the hotel. And invariably in the morning when you got up, you would hear conversations like, "I don't know, somewhere in the middle of the night, I swear I woke up because I felt somebody sit down next to me." Or, "Who was the little kid that was running around the building all night?" Who indeed? One night we had a group of Girl Scouts who stayed there. I helped them get through their evening activities, and I said goodnight. I left them in the hands of one of my coworkers who was sleeping in the office up the road. And we said goodnight. In the morning, she came down and helped them get their breakfast ready, only to find the building empty. Because the Girl Scouts had vanished. What do you do when an entire troop of Girl Scouts disappears in your building? Well, fortunately, about a month later, she ran into the troop leader, and she said, "What happened?" The leader said, "Well, we got everybody bedded down in our sleeping bags, and we were trying to get to sleep, but that's when the noises got started. The creaks, and the groans, that just grew louder and louder until about 2 o'clock in the morning there was a tremendous crash. And we got up, we got in our vans, and we left. It just disappeared." Now, there's one other building there that, well, it's clear, in that building at least, William did not like the idea of girls in his clubhouse, you know. We had one other building that did not particularly care for women. This house was probably built in the 1870s. It could have been as old as the 1850s. It had been out by Springville, a farmhouse. Widening of 151 was going to put it in danger of demolition, so it came to us. When we went out to start getting it ready to move, the building had been empty for a couple of decades, except for the colony of feral cats that lived there. We cleared out the detritus of 120 years. In the upstairs front bedroom, there were straw hats from the 1890s, games from the 1970s, and everything else in between. And that front bedroom was painted an awful, soul-crushing sin red. No jaunty bordello red. No, this was just bitter, angry red. And that anger in that room seethed out and just poured over the house. The house was eventually made to a good-looking building, but it wouldn't hold paint. No matter how carefully it was scraped, no matter how much peel stop you spread out across it, invariably, the paint began to peel in long, thin strips, like something outside was clawing relentlessly at the siding, fighting to get inside. We know the building did not like women. Men never noticed anything, but when the women were in there alone, the doors would slam when no breath of wind stirred the curtains. Noises from other rooms would make them jump. The Victrola had a disconcerting habit of beginning to play of its own volition. And at night, when you had to stay there would invariably come that moment when you suddenly know you are no longer alone. When you sit bolt upright, eyes wide open, but there's nothing but black because you are deep in a valley, far from anything where there are people or electric lights. You hear that first step on the floorboards. And you strain to see it, but there's nothing. The second step, a little closer. The words "who's there" are in your mouth, but you know you're alone. There is no reason to say it, and your mouth is too dry to begin to. The third step. That much nearer. the springs creak and you feel the bed sag as someone crawls in next to you? Will you feel that cold touch on your arm? Will you feel that cold, sour breath on your cheek? Now, that building flooded in 2008, along with a lot of them. And of course, after the mucking out begins the process of ripping out all of that ancient horsehair plaster that covers the walls. And as we pulled the plaster off, then come out the shoes. All right, how many of you out there, when you were gutting after the flood, pulled shoes out of the walls? A lot of you did. The Gazette wrote plenty of articles about it. It goes way back into Eastern Europe in the mists of time. You know, way back in time, it was not uncommon to place a human sacrifice in the foundations of your building to help keep away evil. How many of you played London Bridge when you were little? London Bridge is falling down. Build it up with iron bars. Build it up with wood and stone. Nothing will stop it falling down until you take the key and lock her up. As that process becomes frowned on, we start to ask ourselves, well, what could we substitute? What about a shadow? We could get their shadow, and we could entomb that in the wall. And there grew up in Eastern Europe an entire trade and class of shadow thieves. Slowly it comes down to an object, something of yours. It comes to shoes. There were enough Bohemian immigrants here in Cedar Rapids from the 1870s on that it's no wonder that the houses around the city are full of shoes. But when we took this one apart, it wasn't a shoe over the door or a shoe under the window. Now the walls poured forth, shoe upon shoe upon shoe. What were they so afraid of? When they built that house out on the windswept emptiness of the Iowa prairie, what were they so afraid of that they did everything in their power to keep it away? And now that those talismans are gone, that thing that has been clawing at the siding for 120 years, has it made its way in?